Welcome to this special edition of our show. Albert Einstein once said, "Education is what remains after one has forgotten everything one learned in school." I'm Abe Fischler, and our subject today is on education, which goes beyond pedagogical considerations or scholarly aspirations. Our guest today is a national leader in education, Dr. Abe Fischler. Education represents the major hope for a brighter future, and we'll hear more about this and related subjects following these messages.
With us now is Dr. Abe Fischler, President Emeritus of Nova University. Sir, it's a great pleasure to have you back on the show.
Good to be here again.
Abe, if I may call you Abe and be informal here. Thank you,
can.
sir. What I'd like to ask you is, in this dramatic time in history, we are seeing continuous challenges in the areas of education. How do you, in general, see the challenges facing education at this time?
The problem we face is that of ninth graders, only about 60% are graduating high school with the skills and knowledge base that a high school graduate ought to have, and a saleable skill that will enable some of them to get employment. So we do not have the unskilled labor any longer, nor do we have a need for unskilled labor, because we've given away a good many of those types of positions to third world countries so that they can begin to improve their quality of life.
That's a very interesting point, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'd like to dwell upon that a little bit more, Abe. You're saying that what has changed a lot is the fact that simple menial jobs are being outsourced to companies and workers in third world countries, and the need to train young Americans in more specialized occupational and professional areas is more important today than ever.
Yes, because the menial jobs that we had have been replaced by robotics in the manufacturing area, so that repetitive jobs are being done now by robots. And those were the kind of jobs that were available on the assembly lines for people to work. And we have a shortage of people who want to pick crops and things of that nature, which are still available, but the pay is so low that even though they're working, they're at the very low of the incoming level. And you can't have a quality of life if you're making $7 an hour. So we have a problem. We have to educate every student from every mother so that person has an opportunity to have a decent quality of life, which means he has to have some knowledge and saleable skills when they finish high school. And that's not being done in the majority of high schools, because the poor children who go to high school, by and large, are the children who are dropping out.
Certainly a disquieting matter of concern, and I'd like to ask you to tell our viewers what the school dropout numbers actually are.
It varies from community to community. In the inner cities, probably 50% of the students, ninth graders, don't graduate. In Broward County, about 20% don't graduate. So we have a fairly large dropout rate when you realize the number of students we have in the ninth grade who end up not graduating. And those are the students that end up with being unemployed because they don't have the skills to be employed. And it's hard to find jobs for them. So even with Workforce One having this year $31 million to provide opportunities for students to get training and things like that, and even money for employers to train them, it's very tough to find positions right now for them to be employed. So we have a problem. We're losing a good piece of our workforce because we don't have jobs for them. And that presents a problem.
Abe, how is the current economic reality affecting the American educational system and establishment in general at this time?
Well, normally when you're in a recession, more and more people take post-high school education because they can't find jobs, so they go on to community colleges or they go on to other trade schools where they can pick up a job. it's very difficult for students who do not graduate high school to have those opportunities to go to a community college or to go even to the private post-secondary institutions. And they need a certain level of reading and math skills to be able to get certified in many of the other operations, like short-term courses to make you employable. So we're in a difficult period, and this period is not going to go away rapidly. So we have to ask the question, how do we become more effective and more efficient in the high schools? And the interesting thing is that I just helped a program called Maverick Schools, which are charter schools, to bring students back ages 15 to 21 into an environment where we put computers, 50 computers in a room, and with cloud infrastructure, and students come in and they log on and they're picked up in a self-paced mode so that the student is the client and the teachers are there to enable and help the students in the guidance, motivation role, help a student who's having some difficulty going through a self-paced mode. So instead of time being fixed, which it is in the public schools, time is the variable and a level of mastery is what we seek. And with us living much longer, it doesn't hurt if we had a student graduate at 19 instead of 18. And if we can build an environment which is rewarding the positives instead of punishing youngsters by reinforcing the negatives, then the student won't be anxious to get out of that environment. So we have to kind of change the way we're organized in public education. The structure and organization has to change to accommodate the client. We now focus on the class, and the teacher teaches to the class. But the class has a curve, and the kids who are at the bottom of those curves get punished because they're getting 60s and 50s and 40s because they need more time. But they don't have that time because we start in September approximately, we end in June. And the person gets judged by where we end. And if he doesn't have enough resources to be able to acquire, intellectual resources to acquire what's necessary, then they get an F. And if they come from a family that cares, they get punished at home in addition to getting punished in school. So why should they stay? So we have to make the transition from the class to the client. Each student is a client. Each student has to be given the opportunity to be successful. And if it takes a student a little longer to learn, that's all right. I always use as an example, you can't ask a child to run before they walk. And you can't ask them to walk until they've learned to be able to sit up and get strong enough to sit up. And if it takes them a little longer, that's okay. So time has to be the variable and mastery what we need. And so we have to reorganize and restructure the school. We even to some extent have to restructure the teaching responsibility because a teacher can't go home and prepare 30 lessons. But if the computer is a primary learning tool, then that tool can be responsive to 30 different children.
Speaking of tools, instructional technology has changed and evolved substantially since those early days when you were a teacher in the classroom and you actually authored several books also for elementary schools, some of which were entitled Modern Elementary Science. What are your thoughts on how the educational tools have changed so dramatically over the years, how students were taught back then, and as to compare to how education and how they're taught today?
Well, if you think about the computer as a tool, just a tool, that tool can be used as a learning tool, it can be used as a research tool, it can be used as a communication tool. So that becomes a very important tool. So when a student comes to you, if you don't have a record of the student, you can pre-test the student, see where they function in reading and mathematics, which are the two cultural imperatives. And then make sure they start just a little back so they have some success with what they already know before they move into the unknown for them. And from then on in, they have to learn to be responsive to their time in order to learn through those tools. So they can do projects because they can now go into the internet, into Google and into other sources and use it as a research tool. So if you want to learn geography, all of that's available now on technology. Latitude and longitude is taught more effectively through the technology that's available and programs that are available than it is by a teacher in the classroom. So that becomes a very important learning tool.
This is all very interesting, Abe, and I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these commercial messages. We'll be right back.